If you've watched my Walter Silva's Railroad YouTube video, or any of the how-to YouTube videos on building structures, trees, or other scenery items that I've made, you know how much time and effort can be put into these efforts. At some point, you'll want to take pictures or videos of the work that you do. Later, when you or others view these, you are bound to find some crazy things that detract from the overall imagery. I call these scenery bloopers. I can tell you honestly that after half a century of doing this, I still make some occasionally myself. Let's take a look at some of the most common mistakes that are made and simple ways to avoid many of them. Hopefully, this will help you to avoid many of them in your endeavors. Blooper number 1, leaving hardware in the scene. The nut obviously doesn't belong here. I was using it as a weight. The nail head to the left of the nut should have been sunk farther into the scene before covering it with grass. Nails and screw heads that are exposed look way out of place in the scene. I use pins to hold materials in place also. When I'm done with them, I'll normally poke them into the foam to avoid poking myself. You just have to remember to take them out when you're done. The dinosaur is just for fun. You probably would see him. Paint splashes are another obvious blooper. This one was caused by touching up the sky above this scene. The best thing to do is to get rid of these the moment you spot them rather than leave them. Tool marks are also a problem. I had to use my search dinosaur, Fred, to find these. They are caused when you're smoothing out the plaster in a scene. A piece of coarse sandpaper to rub over them or scraping with the sharp edge of a putty knife will normally get rid of them before you apply your scenic material. If you build a small layout on a flat 4x8 sheet, you probably won't run into this problem. On larger layouts, however, it can be an issue. On my railroad, my sub-road bed is created using multiple strips of pine that are glued together. Afterwards, I butt up carved foam against these strips. That transition area can be a problem if the foam separates later. What I normally do in that case is to spread some dark ballast or ground cover along the sides of the track. After this is glued down, it effectively covers that seam. It also represents what a typical practice on railroads, where they will spread cinders along the track outside of the ballast area to cut down on the amount of weeds that are growing and possibly obstructing the track. Blooper number 5, very flat landscape. Smaller layouts built on flat plywood often have this problem. In this particular stretch, I haven't yet gotten around to putting in the structures and bushes that would break up the area. Very rarely will you see this large of an expanse in real life that is that flat, and it just doesn't look realistic. You can add some raised areas, bushes, and 1 or 2 structures, and that will normally eliminate the problem. White spots are another issue. These spots were created by tool scrapes during the construction of Nemos. A more common cause is the beginner's mistake of applying scenery right over white plaster or vinyl compound. Those of us who've modeled for many years never do that. A better way to approach this is to apply a sealer coat of tan or light brown paint over the entire terrain and then apply the colors afterwards. You do not have to use expensive acrylic paints that you use in your scenery. If you have an old half-gallon of white paint, should be flat, add a little brown to it and save that. And then whenever you are covering a new area of scenery, first coat it with that paint, let it dry thoroughly, and then scenic over it. If you miss a spot with your scenery colors, you're not going to have a problem because the darker tan color will blend in very nicely in the scenery. Abrupt transitions to backdrop are always something that you should avoid. Use vegetation, structures, or building flats in narrow locations. I have a major construction project planned for this particular stretch. That's why you see it as it is. My Funchal Industrial Park is located on a narrow location against a long wall. Vegetations and buildings hide the transition for a very natural effect. You have to look very carefully at this scene to see where the real buildings stop and the buildings in the backdrop start. That's exactly the type of effect you want to have. Out-of-scale material can also cause problems. The brown ground foam here is way too coarse to represent dirt. Fine red oxide ballast would be a much better choice. Gaps under structures are never a good idea. Never place a building on top of terrain without building up the surface around it. You can also sink your buildings into the structure. If you think about it, very rarely do you see houses where the foundation exposure is exactly the same along the length of the house. In some areas, you might see 2 feet of foundation. In some areas, maybe 3 or 4. The same should be true of the buildings on your layout. Look at the difference here with the surrounding dirt covering the gap between the structure and the base terrain. Finally, ground cover mismatches can also be a problem. When we spread ground foam and other materials, we get unrealistic borders between the colors. A great way to get around that is to save the overflow material from when you're sprinkling your trees and other structures. That'll have a mix of browns and greens and yellows in it. And I use that to dust over an area after I've added some extra features. The blending gets rid of that unnatural border. Now I'm going to leave you with a little trick. I've been using it for over 50 years and it really works. Costs nothing to do and it makes a big difference. The next time you're looking at your scene inconsistencies, take 2 cores from toilet paper. Hold them in your hands so that your hands are going to be going against your eyes. You don't want to poke your eyes out. Hold them up to your eyes like a pair of binoculars. Look at the scene through the tubes. When you do that, you will see a restricted view. Normally, you look at a scene like this, and your brain is processing millions of pieces of information. As human beings, we see that, and we compose a scene. And we tend to ignore inconsistencies because we're looking at the whole picture. By restricting the aperture that you're looking through, you're processing a hell of a lot less information. And you will find that little things like an exposed nail, a scrap left in the scene, a break in the scenery will pop out and show like a sore thumb. Don't use binoculars. You do not want to magnify the scene. You want to look at it at the same magnification that your eyes would see. You just want to reduce the amount of data that you're trying to process. This really works, and it's so simple to do. Hopefully, you'll take advantage of this and use it just as another tool to help you in making the perfect scene. May the trains be with you.